Maya's voice tore through the frozen night, desperate and raw. Her breath burst into frantic clouds as she shook the man lying stiff across the icy bench. The abandoned train station swallowed her cry, giving nothing back but the echo and the howl of winter. No answer. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His face, ashen beneath frost, looked carved from ice. Lips blue, hands rigid. A man not far from death. "Help! Somebody please!" Maya shouted again, voice breaking. "Is anyone out there?" Silence answered her. Not silence, wind. A vicious, merciless wind that whipped snow sideways, drowning the tracks, erasing the world. There were no trains tonight, no station master, no travelers, just a storm and two fragile lives inside it. Maya tried again anyway. "Help! Please, somebody!" Her voice dissolved into the blizzard, swallowed whole by the dark. She knelt, pulse hammering. Her gloved fingers pressed his neck, weak pulse, barely there. A breath shuddered through him like a dying engine. "You're alive," she whispered, relief and terror mixing in her chest. "Okay, baby. I got you. I got you." A habit. She called strangers baby when fear set in. She rubbed his cold arms hard, trying to stir warmth. She'd fought death before in emergency rooms, on sidewalks, in church parking lots, but this was different. This was wilderness, winter, no help coming. Her eyes stung, not from cold, from dread. "Stay with me, sir, please." The wind roared like it meant to tear the world apart. His wallet in his pocket. Edward Langston. A photograph of a woman tucked inside, smiling. Softwade. Claire. A funeral program. Loss clung to him like frost. "You been through hell already," she whispered, "and I ain't letting winter finish the job." She looked toward the woods. Her cabin half a mile through dense pines and knee-deep snow. No time. No choices. Her phone dead. Train not due until morning. If she stayed, he would die. If she moved, they might both die. But she moved anyway. She always did. Maya stood, teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. "All right, Mr. Millionaire, let's see what you got left." She bent and heaved him up, not onto her shoulder this time, onto her back. The weight nearly crushed her to her knees. He was tall, solid, a man built for boardrooms, not rescue. "For someone dying, you heavy as sin," she gasped, adjusting him. Her breath came harsh, ragged, but she pushed forward. One step, two. Her boots slipped on frozen planks. Wind slapped at her coat, clawing. Snow blinded her. She staggered off the platform, legs trembling. "Don't you dare die on me," she yelled into the storm. Branches whipped her face. Her foot plunged in a drift up to the knee. She nearly fell, caught herself, kept moving. Pain shot through her back. Her lungs burned. Tears froze on her lashes. Halfway to the cabin, her legs buckled. She dropped to her knees, snow swallowing them both. "Please," she gasped into the storm. "Not like this." She tried to stand. Her muscles refused. Wind screamed. A sheet of metal roofing, ripped from an old shed by the storm, came flying out of the dark, sharp edge glinting. Maya barely had time to duck. The metal slammed into a pine trunk inches above her head, exploding bark everywhere. She screamed, instinctive and terrified. That could have split her skull. She grabbed the billionaire tighter. Breath heaving, she forced herself upright. Not dying. Today. She dragged him again, staggering, clinging to tree trunks, praying with every step. A branch snapped overhead. Snow crashed down. She stumbled but held on. When her cabin finally appeared through the white blur, just a slanted roofline and a faint curl of chimney smoke, she sobbed. Ugly, desperate sobs torn straight from her bones. "One more minute," she said, voice trembling. "Just one more." "Oh." At the door, she collapsed against it, nearly dropping him. Fingers numb, she fumbled the latch. They spilled inside in a heap snow, sweat, fear, and freezing flesh. She kicked the door shut, then crawled to the fireplace. Vision blurry. Matches. Shaking hands. One struck, went out. Another snap of salvation. Flame caught. Fire grew, warming the tiny cabin with stubborn orange light. She turned to Edward, limbs screaming in pain. Blood trickled from a cut across her cheek where a branch had struck her, a bruise already blooming on her shoulder. Her breath scraped. "You still breathing?" she whispered hoarsely, dragging him closer to the fire. A faint exhale, enough to make her tears spill again. "Thank you, Jesus," she breathed. She stripped off his frozen coat, shoes, socks. Her fingers shook, her own clothes soaked through and freezing. But she ignored her pain, her fear, her trembling knees. Blankets over him, her last good quilt, her only fleece throw, even an old robe, anything warm. Her mother's quilt patched blues like southern skies she tucked around his chest. "You ain't going nowhere tonight," she whispered, voice thick. She stumbled to the stove, brewed ginger water from the cheap tea her aunt mailed her once a month, held the cup to his lips. He swallowed, barely, but he swallowed. Her eyes closed in relief, breath shaking. "Good. That's right. You fight. I didn't carry your heavy behind through a blizzard to watch you quit." Exhaustion hit her like a wave. She sank beside him on the floor, back against the chair, hand resting weakly over his heart. Somewhere between pain and darkness, she thought. Sometimes God sends angels. Sometimes he just sends whoever's still standing. And sometimes the ones barely standing become angels by accident. If Maya's courage moved you, hit like and drop your location in the comments. Someone nearby might be watching with you. The storm raged all night. Wind howled like a living thing, slamming against the tiny cabin, searching for a way in. The windows shuddered. The old roof creaked in protest. Snow piled high against the walls, swallowing the world outside. Inside, the fire flickered low but steady, casting a trembling amber glow over two bodies, one broken, one bruised. Maya woke with a jolt. For a second, she didn't know where she was. Her back screamed. Her head throbbed. Her arm was still flung across the chest of the man she'd dragged through the blizzard. His skin no longer icy, but not warm either. She blinked, lips cracked, and reached instinctively for his neck. Pulse, still there, weak but steady. "You stubborn old man," she murmured, her voice raspy, body heavy like wet cement. Still hanging on. Her cheek stung cut from the flying metal. Her legs ached. She tried to sit up and winced. The whole left side of her body felt like it had been tackled by a linebacker and trampled by a herd of bulls. And maybe it had snow, wind, and sheer will had done a number on her. But he was breathing. That was all that mattered. She pushed herself upright slowly, glancing at the clock on the wall. Battery powered. Thank God. Nearly 6 a.m. Light was barely creeping through the iced-over window. The storm had calmed, but only a little. The wind had dulled to a moan. Snow still fell. Soft now, but relentless. The cabin's walls stood, barely. She dragged herself to the fire, threw in 2 more logs. Sparks rose like prayers. She sat in front of the flame for a minute, letting the warmth sink into her bones. Then she turned back to him. "Edward Langston," she said the name in her head again. It didn't belong in a cabin like this. It belonged on a magazine cover, on Wall Street, in conversations about mergers and acquisitions, not crumpled on her floor, wrapped in every blanket she owned. She crouched beside him, checked his fingertips. Still pale, but no signs of frostbite worsening. She'd caught him in time. Maybe. Hopefully. "Mr. Langston," she said softly, "you in there yet?" Nothing. She picked up the chipped ceramic mug she'd used the night before, poured warm ginger tea, then sat behind him, cradling his head with one hand. His eyelids twitched. She tilted the cup gently to his lips. Just a drop. He swallowed. Another drop. Then another. Slow and patient. "Good," she murmured. "Come on back, piece by piece." Outside, snow shifted off the roof in a heavy whoosh. The whole cabin shuddered. Maya flinched, staring up at the beams, still holding. For now, she looked back down at him, his face gaunt in the firelight, but somehow dignified, even half dead. He looked like someone who'd made big decisions in big rooms. She hated that kind of man. Rich, powerful, distant. People like him didn't see women like her. Not unless it benefited them. But this one, he wasn't making any decisions now. He was just a man. A hurting man. She sighed, wiping her sleeve across her brow. She needed to clean that cut on her cheek, check her own bruises, but he needed more. Always someone needing more. She took the bandage roll from her emergency kit, part of the supplies she'd brought from Atlanta, before everything fell apart. She changed the compress she'd wrapped around his chest. Bruised ribs. He'd likely hit something when he collapsed. Maybe on the train platform, maybe earlier. No telling how long he'd been out there before she found him. "You better not be some kind of criminal," she muttered. "Because if I carried a killer through a snowstorm and risked my neck doing it, I'm gonna be real mad." His lips twitched. Just a flicker. She blinked. "Did you just smile?" No answer. She leaned forward. "Hey, if you can hear me, blink once." "Nothing. You're probably just dreaming. Dreaming about private jets and stock prices and caviar and—" His eyes fluttered. Maya froze. Then slowly, his eyelids opened. Unfocused. Glazed. But open. His mouth moved. She leaned close. Claire. Not her name. Her stomach turned. A twist she hadn't expected. "No," she said gently. "I'm Maya." He blinked. Once. Twice. Confusion setting in. "Where?" His voice was a wreck. Dry. Sandpaper and splinters. "You're safe," she said, guiding his head back down onto the folded towel beneath it. "You're in my cabin. In the woods. You passed out at the train station. I found you." He blinked again. "You?" She nodded. "Me." His eyes searched hers, slow and uncertain. Then looked away. Embarrassed, maybe. Or just overwhelmed. "You almost died," she said softly. "Would've, too, if I hadn't shown up." He didn't reply, just stared at the ceiling, the firelight flickering across his face. Maya stood. Her joints screamed. She reached for a towel, dipped it in warm water, wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Don't try to move yet. Just rest." He nodded faintly. She moved to the window. The world was white. Endless. Quiet. Beautiful. And brutal. All at once. "I got food for about 4 days," she said, mostly to herself. "Wood for maybe 5 if I ration it right. And no one's coming through that snow." She glanced back at him. "You rich folks always got backup plans, right?" He didn't answer. "Guess this time, I was your backup plan." He looked at her then, really looked. And for a second, she saw something flicker in his expression. Not judgment, not pride, not pity. Just human. Her lips tightened. "I'm not gonna let you die," she said, "but this ain't charity. You get better, you pull your weight. Deal?" He stared at her, eyes dry, face unreadable. Then barely he nodded. Maya exhaled. Long, heavy. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a woman who had nothing, and a man who once had everything lay beneath a patched roof, held together by nails and prayer. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them was completely alone. The cabin smelled like burning pine and damp wool. The storm outside had quieted into a slow whisper. But inside, tension crackled louder than the fire. Maya moved around the single-room space with quiet efficiency, checking the firewood, warming broth, taking careful inventory of her remaining supplies. But her mind was fixed on the man in her bed. Edward Langston, a name like something from a business magazine cover. She still hadn't told him she knew who he was. Not really. Not out loud. But she did. Anyone who'd ever passed a newsstand or browsed a headline knew the Langston name. CEO of Langston Holdings, billionaire investor, widower, skandalvrid dem but respected. None of that mattered much now, not when he couldn't even sit up by himself. Maya stirred the broth slowly, her bruised shoulder aching with every movement. She could still feel the sting of cold air against her face, the way the wind had nearly torn her apart. The image of that roofing sheet slicing past her skull haunted her. A few inches off and she'd be the one lying motionless under blankets. She limped over to him with the steaming mug, settled on the edge of the bed. "Try this," she said, voice low. He looked up at her, face pale, eyes dark and unreadable. She noticed the way he tried to push himself upright. Too proud to admit the weakness. but his arms trembled and gave out. Without a word, she slid her arm under his shoulders and helped him sit. He was heavy and awkward, but she didn't let it show. She held the cup to his lips. He drank. Slowly, every movement cautious. After the third sip, he pulled his head back slightly. "Thank you," he rasped. Maya nodded but said nothing. She placed the cup on the crate next to the bed and looked him over. He hadn't asked where he was again. Maybe the clarity was settling in. Or maybe he just didn't care. "I've got some canned food. A bit of rice. Lentils. Not much," she said matter-of-factly. "We'll stretch it." "You live here alone?" The question caught her off guard. "I do." "You." He looked toward the window, where frost clung to the glass like lace. "This cabinet yours?" "No," she replied. "I rent it from a retired park ranger. He winters down in Arizona. Doesn't ask questions. Just cash in an envelope every October." Edward blinked slowly, as if trying to place that in the context of the world he knew. It didn't fit. Women like Maya Black, alone, 30-ish, with no ring and no apology, didn't exist in his world. At least, not like this. She leaned back slightly. "You don't remember how you got to the train station, do you?" He shook his head. "Private plane. Aspen to Denver. Weather turned. Something went wrong. Plane crash? Emergency landing. I left. Started walking. Looking for help." Maya studied him. "You walked through that storm?" He nodded faintly. "You're lucky you didn't lose your hands or feet. Lucky you didn't lose everything." He didn't respond, just stared into the fire. She noticed how his fingers clenched the blanket, knuckles pale. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "What about me?" He turned to look at her. "Why are you here? Alone. In the middle of nowhere." The fire popped behind them, sending sparks up the chimney. Maya stood slowly, walked to the fire and stirred it, needing the distance. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was flat. "I used to be a nurse. Atlanta. Community clinic. It was underfunded, understaffed. We did our best, but management was corrupt, pocketing state funds, lying on reports. I reported it." She paused, eyes on the flame. "Didn't go the way I thought it would." Edward's gaze followed her, but he didn't interrupt. "They said I made it up, said I was difficult, angry, disruptive. You know those words they use when a black woman stops being quiet." Now she turned, arms crossed, voice steady. "They fired me, put a note in my file that made it impossible to get work anywhere else. I applied to over 100 hospitals, clinics, even a nursing home in Alabama. Nothing." Edward's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "Don't be. The system's been broken longer than either of us been breathing. I just forgot for a minute that truth don't mean much when money's on the other side." A long silence settled between them. Outside, the snow ticked gently against the window like soft fingers tapping to be let in. Edward cleared his throat. "Claire, my wife. She died last year. Cancer." Maya sat down again, this time on a wooden stool near the fire. "I saw the photo," she said. He looked startled. "In your wallet." He nodded once. "Pancreatic. We caught it too late. I was traveling. I thought I had time." Maya's voice was quiet. "You didn't." "No," he whispered. "I didn't." The silence returned, heavier this time. "I thought if I could just close the next deal, launch the new branch, just another quarter of pushing." His voice cracked. "She died when I was in London. I missed her last day." Maya looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "Funny," she said. "You thought money would buy time. I thought truth would buy justice. We both got robbed." He let out a shaky breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "You think people like us are rare," she continued, "but we're everywhere, all of us trying to do the right thing and getting steamrolled by the machine." Edward's eyes met hers. "And yet here we are," he said. "Still standing," she replied. They sat in silence again, but this time, it wasn't sharp. It was soft, companionable. The fire cracked louder. Edward lay back against the pillow. His body still weak, but his eyes more focused. She covered him again with the quilt, adjusted the logs in the fireplace. "You'll be okay," she said, mostly to herself, then added, almost as an afterthought, "So will I." Edward awoke to the scent of coffee and wood smoke. He blinked slowly. The ceiling above him was made of rough wooden beams, the kind you didn't see in luxury resorts or penthouse lofts. His throat was raw. Every muscle in his body ached, and a dull pounding throbbed behind his right temple. The fire crackled gently somewhere to his left. Outside, something stirred, a groan of trees swaying in wind, or maybe snow sliding off the roof. But inside, it was warm, still, safe. It took him a moment to remember where he was. And then he saw her, Maya. She was sitting at the small table near the window, back half turned toward him, her profile silhouetted against pale daylight. She wore a thick, oversized gray sweater, with the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Her braids were tied back loosely, a few stray strands catching light. In front of her was a battered notebook and a chipped mug. She was writing something. His voice came out hoarse. "What time is it?" She turned slowly, and he could see the surprise flicker across her face just for a moment before she masked it with a calm nod. "Almost noon," she said. "You slept straight through." He tried to sit up but only managed an awkward shuffle before wincing and falling back. "You shouldn't push it," she added, standing. "You've been through a lot." He watched as she moved toward him, steady, calm, deliberate. There was no nurse's uniform, no badge, no sterile hospital lighting, but she carried that same grounded presence. The kind people only developed after years of walking through fear and pain and not letting it destroy them. "I feel like hell," he muttered. "You look like someone who tried to fight a blizzard in a suit," she said dryly, crouching beside him with a water bottle. "Take small sips." He drank, grateful. The water burned down his throat like fire before turning to ice in his gut. She waited until he finished before asking, "You remember anything else?" He shook his head, though pieces were starting to reassemble. The crash landing, wandering through snow, his numb hands fumbling with a broken phone. Then blackness. "I should have died," he said, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Maya didn't deny it. "You were close." Her honesty was sharp, comfortless, but he appreciated it. "How did you find me?" he asked. "I didn't find you," she said. "I stumbled into that old train station by accident. Storm forced me off course. You were already there, barely hanging on." He frowned. "I don't remember seeing you. You wouldn't." She stood and poured coffee into a second mug, brought it to his bedside. You were half frozen and mumbling the name Claire over and over. He took the mug, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. No bitterness, no curiosity. Just truth. "She was my wife." "I figured," Maya said simply. "Picture in your wallet." Edward nodded, the pain sharp but distant, like a wound that had started scabbing over. "We'd been married 16 years. Cancer took her last year. Fast. Unforgiving." Maya sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't say she was sorry, didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and asked, "And you? You still haven't forgiven yourself, have you?" He blinked. "No." Silence stretched between them, not heavy, just real. He studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "Yeah?" she said, eyebrow raised. "And what did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone who'd ask for a reward. Or post a selfie with the billionaire she saved." "I don't take selfies," she replied. "And I don't need your money." He watched her sip from her mug like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're different." She snorted. "I get that a lot." He didn't smile, not quite, but something in his chest shifted. She wasn't playing a part. She wasn't afraid of him, or at least, she wasn't showing it. She wasn't impressed by the name Langston. She wasn't curious about his net worth. That unsettled him more than anything. "I didn't even know who you were at first," she added, as if reading his thoughts. "Didn't matter. Still doesn't." "Why?" She leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. "Because I've seen enough to know money doesn't make you good, and being broke doesn't make you bad. People are people. Some fight for others, some leave them in the snow." He held her gaze. "And you?" "I fight," she said simply. Something inside him, long dormant, stirred. The door rattled in its frame as wind gusted again outside. Snow ticked softly against the windows. "Where are we exactly?" he asked. 10 miles outside Pine Ridge. Closest neighbor is about 4 miles east. But with the roads snowed in and the power lines down, we're not getting help anytime soon. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that. "You said you're a nurse?" She corrected. "I lost that job when I opened my mouth about things that weren't supposed to be talked about." Edward didn't press for details. He already knew the type of world she'd faced. It was the same one he'd spent his career profiting from. Different levels. Same rules. "I owe you my life," he said, quiet. She looked at him evenly. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't waste it." "No." That silenced him. A few more minutes passed. He sipped coffee. She wrote a note in her journal. He watched the way she kept things orderly, clean towel here, extra mug there, every movement deliberate, almost rehearsed. A woman used to holding chaos together with her bare hands. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She looked up. "Where?" "Anywhere. Starting fresh." She shook her head. "Fresh starts are a myth. You just carry your wounds to new zip codes." Edward exhaled. "Still, this place, it's quiet, but it feels temporary," she finished. He nodded. "Everything is," she said, "but maybe that's why it matters." For the first time in a long while, Edward felt the weight in his chest lighten just a little. Not from her words, but from her presence. Steady, scarred, honest. She stood. "You need rest," she said. "Food's next. After that, we see what this storm left behind." He nodded, then paused. "Maya," he said. She looked back. "Thank you, Mai." Her face didn't soften, but her eyes did. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We're still in it." She turned, her silhouette framed in the firelight, moving back toward her journal, her coffee, her quiet corner of the cabin. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Edward Langston let his head fall back against the pillow and felt the beginning of something he hadn't known in months. Peace. The wind had finally gone still by the next morning, as if the storm had exhausted itself in one final tantrum and now lay sleeping across the white hills. Light filtered through the frosted window panes in the cabin, soft and silver, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Edward stirred first, the stiffness in his back enough to wake him before the warmth of the fire could lull him back to sleep. He sat up slowly this time. His muscles still complained, but they obeyed. He pulled the quilt around his shoulders and turned toward the window. All he could see were trees, blanketed in snow, pines heavy with white, sky the color of iron. Maya stood outside near the shed, bundled in her coat, boots up to her knees, splitting firewood with a hatchet. The rhythm of it echoed faintly through the walls. She wasn't big, not by any means, but she swung with practiced efficiency. He watched as she adjusted her stance, steadied the next log, and brought the blade down clean. He didn't know why, but he watched her for several minutes. Something about the way she moved, purposeful, not wasting energy on anything unnecessary. It occurred to him that she hadn't once tried to impress him, not with sympathy, not with charm, not even with the fact that she had, without exaggeration, saved his life. He'd spent his whole career surrounded by people whose smiles cost money, whose help came with strings, and now here he was, wrapped in a borrowed quilt, recovering in a stranger's cabin, alive because someone decided kindness was reason enough. When Maya returned a few minutes later, cheeks red from cold and arms full of wood, he was waiting with a question. "Why did you do it?" She paused in the doorway, stomping snow from her boots. "Do what?" "Save me." Maya stacked the wood in a bin near the fire, then looked over at him. "I couldn't leave you to die," she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "But you didn't know who I was." "Exactly." That answer left him speechless for a moment. She hung her coat on the hook by the door and moved to the stove, where she started preparing breakfast: instant grits, eggs from a carton, a few slices of canned ham. He watched her in silence for a while before speaking again. "Most people would have waited for someone else to find me, or they would have checked my wallet and figured the storm could have me." Maya cracked an egg into the skillet. It sizzled. "I'm not most people." "No," Edward said. "You're not." She slid him a plate a few minutes later and settled into the chair across from him with her own. They ate in silence. the kind that wasn't awkward but simply unpracticed. "I used to live in silence like this," he said after a while, pushing the last bite of egg around his plate. Maya glanced up. "Before your wife passed?" He nodded. "Claire and I, by the end, we weren't talking much. Not about anything real, just logistics, appointments, meds, deadlines." Maya sipped her tea. "Grief shows up early sometimes. She deserved more than that," he murmured. "I bet you did too." Edward looked up, surprised by the softness in her voice. "Loss does that," she said. "Turns people into ghosts before they're even gone." He swallowed hard, his eyes burning more than he liked. "Did you have someone?" "No," Maya replied. "Not like that. Just people I loved who didn't stay, or couldn't." She stood, took both their plates to the basin, began washing them with boiled water. "After my license was pulled, I couldn't afford to stay in Atlanta. Couldn't afford to leave either. So I came here." He leaned back slightly. "Why here?" "Cheap rent, no neighbors, a good place to be invisible while I figure things out." Edward looked around the cabin bare bones, but somehow still full of presence. Hers. "You know," he said after a pause, "you're the first person I've had a real conversation with in months." Maya snorted softly. "You should talk to better people." "I tried, but most people just echo whatever they think I want to hear." "Must be exhausting." "It is." They lapsed into silence again. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the eaves. Maya turned toward him. "You need to move around today. Just a little. Keep circulation up. You can use the chair, the counter. Hold on if you need to." Edward raised a brow. "Is that medical advice?" "It's human advice," she said. "If you sit too long, your body forgets how to stand." He nodded, then slowly swung his legs off the bed. The floor was cold, even through the thick socks she'd put on him while he was unconscious. Every step felt like a conversation with his own weakness. But he did it. 10 steps across the room, then back. Maya watched without comment, just nodded once as he sat again. "You'll be stronger by tomorrow," she said. "I already am," he replied. They made tea together that evening. She had a stash of old peppermint bags in a tin marked Christmas 2019. They sat near the fire, each in their own chair. She was reading a dog-eared novel. He was flipping through her collection of old National Geographics. At one point, he looked up and said, "I can't figure you out." Maya didn't look up. "Good. No, really. You've got every reason to be bitter. But you're not." She turned the page. "I'm not bitter, Edward. I'm just tired." He set the magazine down. "What happens when the road's clear?" "You go back to Atlanta?" She shook her head. "There's nothing to go back to." He hesitated. "Then what?" Maya finally looked at him. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I'm still here, and I've got matches, canned beans, and a roof that mostly holds." She smiled faintly. "That's more than some people get." He nodded slowly. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he let out a real breath. There were no expectations in her voice. No requests. No questions about what he could offer her. She didn't want his last name, his money, or his story. She just wanted honesty, presence, peace. That night, as they each drifted off to sleep on opposite sides of the room, him in the bed, her in the old armchair wrapped in 2 quilts, Edward whispered into the dark, "Good night, Maya." She didn't open her eyes, but her voice reached through the warmth between them. "Good night, Edward." The storm may have passed, but winter had left its scars behind. Edward woke to the scent of bacon frying and something sweeter, maple, maybe. The sound of the skillet sizzling mingled with a blues record playing faintly on an old radio in the corner. He sat up slower than the day before, but this time, his body didn't fight him quite as hard. The bruises still lingered, but the ache had dulled to a reminder, not a warning. Maya stood at the stove, barefoot in thick socks, swaying gently to the rhythm of B. King as she flipped pancakes and tapped the spatula against the pan like it was a tambourine. For a moment, Edward didn't say a word. He just watched her ease. The way her shoulders moved with the music. How her hum blended into the room like it belonged there. He found himself smiling. "You look like you're finally human again." she said without turning. I might be, he replied. You always cook like this for your guests? You're not a guest. You're a medical situation, she said, glancing over her shoulder with a smirk. And if I don't eat something warm in the morning, I turn into a mean woman. You don't want that. I'll take your word for it. She slid a plate across the table a few minutes later, 2 pancakes, 3 strips of bacon, scrambled eggs just a little crispy on the edges. Comfort food, soul food. The kind he hadn't tasted in years. The kind you don't get at rooftop brunches. They ate in easy silence. It wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like rhythm. After breakfast, Maya pulled on her coat and boots. Where are you headed? Edward asked. Just outside. Gotta check the generator shed and see if I can get the old CB radio working. If we're lucky, someone's picking up signals. He watched her zip her jacket, pull a knit hat down over her braids. Want me to come? He asked. She paused. Can you walk across 3 feet of snow without passing out? I walked across a mountain in a snowstorm. Don't I get some credit? You nearly died, she replied. That's negative credit. Still, she considered it for a beat. Fine, she said. But if you collapse, I'm not dragging your behind back again. Edward pulled on the coat she'd dried for him by the fire. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was warm. He followed her outside into a world drowned in white. The cabin sat nestled between thick pine trees whose branches sagged under the weight of snow. The sky had cleared, leaving a bright, cold blue overhead that made everything look sharp and surreal. Their boots crunched in the snow as they moved around the back of the cabin toward the small shed. Maya pried the door open, revealing the gas-powered generator and a dusty old radio set covered in a plastic tarp. Hasn't worked right in 2 years, she muttered. But I'm feeling lucky. Muh. Edward stood back, watching as she fiddled with the dials, pressed switches, and muttered things under her breath. He was impressed not just with her technical know-how, but the sheer force of will she seemed to pour into everything she did. This thing was my uncle's, she said, tapping the side of the radio. Used it during Katrina, picked up traffic from the Coast Guard once. Static filled the air. She adjusted the antenna, rotated the frequency knob. More static, then just faintly a voice. Male, tinny, distant. Delta, snowbound, supplies, repeat. Maya froze. Edward leaned in. That's a real person. Could be, she whispered. Could be a ghost of a broadcast from days ago. She adjusted again. Another burst of garbled words, then silence. They waited. Nothing. Maya let out a breath and stepped back. Well, she said, at least we know the airwaves aren't completely dead. Nah. She started walking back toward the cabin, but Edward stopped, turning in the opposite direction. What is it? Maya called. He didn't answer at first. Then, tracks. She walked over and followed his gaze. Barely visible, half covered by last night's light snowfall, were boot prints. Deep, fresh. Too big to be hers. Someone else was here, he said. Maya crouched, studied them. Could be a ranger, she said. Could be a hiker caught in the storm. But nobody should be up here this time of year. Edward scanned the tree line. They came from the south. Toward the ravine, she said slowly. It's not a good route. The tracks led away from the shed, past the tree line, and vanished into the white. Should we follow them? He asked. Maya shook her head. Not without gear. Not with you barely able to stand. If someone's out there, they'll either come back or they won't. Edward turned back toward the cabin, unsettled. Inside, he warmed his hands by the fire while Maya peeled off her outer layers and stored her boots by the stove. You think we're alone out here? He asked. I thought so. Still think so? She hesitated. I don't know. Later that afternoon, Edward found Maya sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, flipping through a small leather-bound journal. Writing again? He asked. Reading this time. He sat beside her, careful of his bruised ribs. Whose journal is that? Mine, she said. But from 3 years ago, he raised a brow. I write letters to people I've lost, she explained. Helps me remember them without turning them into saints. Edward looked at her. You write to people who hurt you, too. Especially them, she said. Do you ever send them? She shook her head. No need. It's not for them. They sat in silence. The fire popped softly. Outside, snow began falling again. gentle and quiet, like a secret. Edward reached into his wallet, the one Maya had dried for him, and pulled out the photo of Claire, her smile still radiant, still untouched by time or illness. He held it out to Maya. "She would have liked you," he said. Maya took the photo gently, studied it. She had kind eyes. "She did." She handed it back. Their fingers touched for half a second. Something passed between them, not romance. Not yet. But understanding. The kind you only earn in the aftermath of storms. That night, neither of them said goodnight. They just sat near the fire, a little closer than before, letting the quiet speak. The wind returned before sunrise. It wasn't the full fury of the storm, but it carried a warning, sharp and dry, whistling through the trees like a breath drawn between clenched teeth. Edward stirred on the cot, the creaking of the cabin waking him from a restless sleep. For a moment, he wasn't sure if the sound was part of a dream or real. Then came a knock, not the creak of wood or the groan of pine, but a very deliberate, human knock, 3 times slow, heavy. Maya was already awake. She stood near the door, unmoving, one hand wrapped around the wooden handle of the old fire poker. Her shoulders were tense, barefoot, but alert. Her eyes met Edward's across the room, and in that second, they both understood. This wasn't a ranger. Another knock. Edward sat up, wincing, grabbing his coat and slipping on his boots. "Stay back," Maya said quietly. "I'm not letting you open that alone," he replied. She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. She stepped to the door and pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Then, a low-voiced male spoke from the other side. "I need help." Maya looked to Edward again, eyes narrowed. The voice repeated, "I'm not armed. I swear. I just need shelter for a night." She unlatched the top bolt, then the bottom. Slowly, she opened the door just enough to peek out. A man stood in the snow, wrapped in a dark green coat, face half hidden behind a scarf and ski goggles. Snow dusted his shoulders, and he held his arms slightly raised to show he carried nothing in his hands. "My truck flipped on the ridge," he said. "I've been walking since last night." Maya studied him, then opened the door wider. "Step inside." Slowly. He obeyed, removing the goggles and scarf as he entered. Edward recognized him instantly. Tall, maybe 45, short brown hair streaked with gray, a weather-worn face, but one that had once appeared in business publications. Derek Vale. Edward's voice was calm, but cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" Maya looked between them, surprised. "You two know each other?" she asked. Edward didn't take his eyes off Derek. "He used to be my partner." "Used to be?" Derek said with a bitter laugh, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Don't act like I betrayed you. You vanished, Edward. Left the board hanging. Everyone thought you were dead." Maya closed the door and locked it, but kept the poker in her hand. "I was nearly dead," Edward said. "I crash-landed during the storm. She saved my life." Derek glanced at Maya, and for a moment, Edward saw the flicker of condescension in his former partner's eyes, the way he scanned her like a commodity instead of a human being. "She did, huh?" Derek said, stepping closer to the fire. "Then I guess we both owe you thanks, miss." "Of Maya," she said flatly. "Maya Williams." Derek extended a hand. She didn't shake it. "You're not just here by accident," Edward said. "You came looking." Derek turned back toward him, his smile thin. "I followed the signal. I saw the flare you lit last night." Maya's brow furrowed. "I didn't light any flare." Edward sat back, stunned. "Neither did I." Derek's expression shifted, something between confusion and calculation. "I saw light near the ridge. Figured someone was sending a signal. I followed the smoke this morning." Maya shot Edward a sharp glance. "If it wasn't us," she said, "then someone else is out there." Derek stepped closer to the fire. "Maybe. Or maybe it was old embers, a hiker's camp." "No," Maya said quietly. "There hasn't been a clear trail through that ridge in months." A long silence followed. The wind howled against the cabin again, and a log in the fireplace cracked sharply. Derek turned to Edward. "You look like hell." "I've felt worse. I bet the board would love to see you right now. Alive. Mostly intact." "I'm not ready to return," Edward said. "Too bad," Derek replied. "Because the vultures are circling. Your cousin Trent is already talking about selling the aerospace division." "Said you left no instructions?" Edward's jaw tightened. He wasn't supposed to touch it. Well, Derek said, you disappearing gave him a perfect excuse. He's spinning the story Edward Langston, grieving widower, vanishes during a storm. Tragic, and very convenient for anyone wanting to clean house. Maya stepped forward. Why are you telling him all this? Derek looked her over again, slower this time. Because if he stays out here much longer, he won't have a company to return to. Edward stared into the fire. The reality of what waited outside the cabin walls was returning like a tide. And with it, choices. But something felt off. Derek, he said, how'd you get your truck up that far? That road's been closed for days. Derek's face didn't change, but his pause was long enough. Off-road tires. Chains. I was prepared. Maya folded her arms. Then why'd you come up here alone? With a blizzard forecast? Derek smiled. Because I thought I'd find something valuable. Edward caught the slip immediately. Not someone. Something? Another pause. Then Derek changed the subject. Mind if I rest a bit before I head back? I need warmth, food, maybe a blanket. Maya didn't move. You're not staying the night. Edward stood now, slow but firm. You can rest. 30 minutes. Then you go. Derek met his eyes. For a long moment, nothing was said. Then Derek smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, he said. I understand. But Edward saw the shift, the calculation. Derek wasn't here just to find him. And Maya knew it, too. Later, as Derek dozed lightly by the fire, Edward and Maya stepped outside to speak quietly beneath the overhang. You trust him? She asked. No, Edward said. And you shouldn't either. He's hiding something. I agree. They both stared out toward the ridge, where the tracks had once disappeared. Someone lit that flare, Maya said, and it wasn't him, which means someone else is close. Edward looked toward the trees, his breath misting in the cold. We're not alone up here, he murmured. And this just got more dangerous. By the time Derek stepped back into the snow, the air had turned colder. Maya watched him trudge off toward the tree line, his figure slowly shrinking against the vast white. She didn't wave. Neither did Edward. They waited in silence until he disappeared into the forest. Maya exhaled. I don't like it. I don't either, Edward said, arms crossed over his chest. He lied. De Grengs. About what? About everything, Edward replied. He came up here too prepared, too fast. That wasn't a man caught in a blizzard. That was a man on a mission. Maya closed the door and bolted it. He's not the only one with secrets. Edward looked at her. You think he came up here because of me? She nodded. I think he came because he thinks you know something. Or maybe because he's worried you'll remember something you're not supposed to. Edward rubbed his forehead. There was a project. Months before Claire died. Something in our international division. Large funds were shifting. Encrypted files sealed behind triple firewalls. I didn't ask questions then. Do you remember what it was about? Only the code name, Project Meridian. Maya paused mid-step. That sounds like a government contract. He nodded. We had defense deals, data systems, encryption protocols for satellite relays. But I kept my distance from the black budget stuff. But someone didn't. Edward met her eyes. Exactly. They stood quietly for a moment, the wind whispering against the windows. If Derek came looking for you, Maya said, he didn't come alone, or without backup. I know. She crossed the room and pulled out a weathered duffel bag from beneath the cot. Inside were survival items. Road flares, a hunting knife, rope, 2 emergency blankets. Planning for the end of the world? Edward asked. No, Maya said. Planning for when the world forgets about you. He watched her unpack a small set of maps. Hand-drawn trails, elevation notes, alternate paths leading down into the valley. We follow this ravine after the first thaw. It'll take us to a ranger station, but it'll be a hard walk. Edward moved beside her. How soon do you think we need to leave? Soon, she said. If Derek went back to town, fine. But if he circled around and radios someone, he could be planning to return? Edward finished. With company. Maya nodded. I've lived too long in places where people come back when they think you're alone. They spent the next few hours in quiet coordination packing emergency supplies, checking the fuel levels for the generator, stashing canned goods in a cloth bag. The cabin, once a place of sanctuary, now felt like a foxhole. Edward paused beside the fire, looking around. "I can't believe this is where I ended up," he said. Maya glanced up from lacing her boots. "You thought you'd die in a boardroom?" He gave a tired laugh. "I thought I'd die owning the boardroom." Her expression softened. "The snow has a way of stripping things down. Power, pride, ego." He nodded, but his face darkened. "If Project Meridian is what I think it is, Derek might be willing to kill for it." Maya stilled. "You think it's that deep?" He looked at her. "Billions in contracts, international surveillance networks, hidden players. I know my company. If he's willing to climb this far into the mountains to find me, he's scared." She leaned back. "You're not the only one hiding something, Edward." He turned. "What do you mean?" Maya hesitated, then sat down slowly. Her voice was quieter now. 2 years ago, I treated a patient, a girl 16, undocumented, came in with burns on her hands, said it was a cooking accident. Edward listened, silent. "I knew it wasn't," she continued. "The bruises, the fear in her eyes. I filed a mandatory report with the state, thought I was helping." "You weren't?" Next day, 2 men showed up at the clinic. Clean suits. Government ID. Said the report was a miscommunication. They erased it. Told me the girl didn't exist. That if I kept pushing, my license might slip through the cracks. Edward's expression hardened. "What did you do?" "I pushed anyway. And lost everything." The wind howled again outside. This time, it didn't sound like just weather, it sounded like a warning. Edward stepped closer. "Maya, I didn't just fall into your life. Something brought us both here. Together." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You think that storm was fate?" "I think the truth has a way of surviving," he said, "even in a blizzard." The fire crackled beside them, warmth in a cold world. Then, a sound, not a knock, but the crunch of boots outside. Both froze. Maya grabbed the poker. Edward took the hunting knife from the duffel. They moved silently toward the window. A figure stood by the tree line, not moving, not advancing, watching. A flash of something glass? Binoculars? "Derek?" Maya whispered. Edward narrowed his eyes. "No. Too tall." Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Maya turned to Edward. "We leave tomorrow." He nodded. "Before sunrise." "No." As they locked the door, packed the last of the supplies, and settled in for one final night, both knew one thing for certain. They were no longer hidden, and the real storm hadn't even started yet. Before dawn, the cabin was silent but alive with preparation. Maya moved through the space with precision, her footsteps muffled by layers of snow boots and flannel. Edward, moving slower but steadier than days prior, tightened the straps of the duffel bag on his back. The fire had been allowed to die down to embers, and the stove was cold. They left the mugs unwashed, the blankets folded, and the furniture pushed neatly into corners like they were saying goodbye to a friend too kind to ever ask for anything in return. Outside, the sky was a deep violet. The snow still fell, but softer now, dusting the trees like powdered sugar. Edward adjusted the scarf around his neck, glanced once more at the cabin. "You sure we're not being paranoid?" Maya didn't answer immediately. She crouched and pressed her fingers into the snow beside the door. Fresh tracks, a single boot print, deeper than their own. She looked up, her voice even. "Someone was here. Last night." Edward stiffened. "Watching us?" "Probably." He exhaled. "Then let's not make it easy." They moved south toward the ravine, the path Maya had marked on her map. It was narrow and twisted, shielded by thick pine trees and steep inclines. The trail wasn't visible from the sky and hard to track from the ground. It would be slow and dangerous, but it offered cover, and that was more valuable now than comfort. The first mile passed with little conversation. Only the rhythmic crunch of boots and the occasional snap of a twig beneath snow. Edward's breath came heavier than Maya's, but he kept pace. Each step helped warm his body, push blood into the places that had grown weak during his recovery. They reached a clearing by late morning. Maya stopped, scanning the tree line. "Here," she said. "We break for 10 minutes. Water, granola." They sat on a fallen log, sharing a pouch of trail mix. Edward's hands trembled slightly from the cold, but he was stronger than he'd been even a day ago. "I used to hate silence," he said. Maya raised an eyebrow. "And now?" "Now it feels like the only thing that's honest." She gave a small smile. "That's the blizzard talking." They both chuckled, but then Edward's expression darkened. "Maya," he said, "what if I told you I remember more?" She turned to him fully now, attentive. "I was working on a review," he said. 2 days before my flight. Internal audit logs flagged irregular transfers, coded through a dummy charity. Millions moving offshore. Her eyes narrowed. "To who?" "I don't know. But I sent a message to our compliance officer before the flight. Subject line said, 'Meridian breach. You are gent.'" "And then the plane went down." He nodded. Maya leaned forward. "That wasn't an accident." Edward's voice was low. "I think someone wanted to erase me." A sound snapped through the trees. Both froze. Not the wind. Not an animal. Footsteps. Fast. Moving parallel to them on the ridge above. Maya grabbed Edward's arm. "Move. Now." "Ugh." They took off, ducking under branches and weaving through the trees. The snow made it difficult, slippery, unpredictable, but they kept moving. The sound of someone tracking them grew louder, closer. Maya led him down a steep slope, half sliding, half running. They reached a frozen creek bed and crossed over quickly, their boots crunching on ice and stone. Behind them, a shout rang out. Male voice. "Stop. Edward Langston, we just want to talk." Maya didn't look back. "They're not here to talk." Edward didn't doubt her. They pushed farther into the forest, finally stopping beneath a natural rock overhang that curved like a frozen wave. Maya pulled him down behind the stones, both panting, snow melting into their collars. She peeked up over the ridge, then ducked back. "2 men," she said. "One with a rifle." Edward cursed under his breath. "They're serious." "We keep moving," she said. "We take the creek another mile. It connects to the trail near Bear's Hollow. From there, it's 2 hours to the ranger station. And if they catch up?" She pulled the flare gun from her pack. "Then we make noise." They continued down the creek, this time moving more cautiously, using the rocks and fallen limbs as cover. The men behind them were deliberate, but not yet reckless. Maya guessed they were trying to avoid alerting the entire valley. A half hour later, they emerged into a gorge where the trees gave way to open space. Snow lay untouched, unbroken except for the line of a fox's tracks weaving across the clearing. Edward stopped, panting. "We need a minute." Maya checked behind them. 5, no more. They crouched under a pine, watching the sky begin to brighten with weak winter Sunday. Edward turned to her. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Maya met his eyes. "Because the kind of power chasing you down doesn't just hurt one man, it silences 100. He stared at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. "I've seen systems twist truth, seen men turn justice into profit. If you've got a key to exposing something real, then we don't run, we fight." For the first time, Edward didn't feel like dead weight in her plan. He felt like a piece of something bigger than survival. Then, crack, a bullet struck the tree behind them, showering them with bark and snow. "Run!" Maya shouted. They sprinted across the clearing, zigzagging toward the far ridge. Another shot rang out. Closer this time. Edward stumbled but kept his feet. Maya grabbed his arm, yanking him behind a boulder. She raised the flare gun, aimed high, and fired. A burst of red smoke exploded into the sky bright against the pale blue. "Now they know where we are," Edward yelled. "That's the point," Maya said through gritted teeth. "So will everyone else." The flare arced and hung in the air like a warning. A message. We are not hiding anymore. The red flare still lingered in the sky like an angry scar when they reached the crest of the ridge. Snow kicked up around their feet, their breath coming hard and fast. Edward's side screamed with every inhale, his lungs raw from the cold. Maya, though winded, pushed forward like someone who'd outrun worse things before. Below them lay the valley, serene in its illusion of peace. The pine trees thinned near the base, revealing a clearing dotted with snow-covered rocks. and a narrow cabin weather-worn, wood darkened by years of storms. The ranger station. There it is, Edward gasped. Maya didn't slow her pace. It's not over yet. They descended the slope in a crouched sprint, slipping, tumbling through snowdrifts waist-deep in some places. Every sound behind them made Edward flinch, a branch snapping, a crow's wings. He imagined Derek Vale's men still on their trail, maybe flanking them. The flare had bought time, but not safety. By the time they reached the front steps of the station, Maya's hands were scraped raw from catching herself on ice. She knocked on the door hard. "Open up, we need help." No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Edward stepped beside her, squinting through the frosted window. "I see movement inside." Then came the shuffle of boots, a bolt sliding. The door creaked open. A man appeared, mid-50 seconds, square-jawed with graying stubble, eyes like storm clouds. His ranger uniform was wrinkled, but intact. A badge on his chest read C. Albright. "You the ones who lit the flare?" he asked, voice deep and flat. Maya nodded. "We're being chased. We need radio access. Emergency broadcast." Albright looked them over, noting Edward's disheveled appearance, Maya's bleeding knuckles, the fear in both their eyes. Without a word, he opened the door wider. "Get in." The warmth inside hit like a wave. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner. The cabin smelled of pine and old paper. Maps were tacked on every wall, alongside a corkboard filled with notes and Polaroids. Edward collapsed into a chair. Albright didn't ask who he was. Instead, he turned to Maya. "Talk." She gave him the short version. Billionaire crash survivor. Crooked former partner. Shadowy project called Meridian. And a pursuit that turned deadly. Albright listened, arms folded. When she finished, he didn't blink. "I picked up the flare on the old weather channel," he said. "Didn't expect it to be Langston." Edward looked up, surprised. "You know me?" Albright gave a short nod. "Used to fly recon in Iraq. You were on the supplier list. Your tech kept our birds in the air." Edward sat straighter. "Then you know I wouldn't make this up." "I know you're smart enough not to," Albright replied. He moved to the radio set on his desk and began tuning. "I'll raise the state ranger office. They've got a line to local law enforcement." Maya stood beside him, arms crossed. "What if the people chasing us are law enforcement?" Albright stopped, mid-dial. Edward answered for her. "We don't know who's clean anymore." The ranger's jaw tightened. "Well," he said, "I've got a friend at the station in Telluride. 40-year man. I trust him." He keyed the mic. "Base, this is Station Echo 7. Emergency. Repeat, emergency." The static hissed for a moment. Then, "Echo 7, this is Telluride Dispatch. Go ahead." Albright's voice was calm. "Two individuals in danger. One is Edward Langston. The other is Maya Williams. Suspected corporate foul play. Armed pursuers. Request immediate extraction. Coordinates, inbound." "Copy that, Echo 7. Confirm Langston is alive?" "Confirmed." "Understood. Stand by." Albright scribbled something on a notepad, then turned to Maya. "They'll send a chopper if weather holds. 3 hours, maybe less." Maya gave a short nod. "We'll wait." But Edward stood suddenly, stepping to the window. "They're not waiting." Across the field, two figures emerged from the tree line. Armed. Deliberate. Black winter gear. Helmets. Maya joined him. "They found us." Albright moved fast. He bolted the door, killed the lights, and handed Maya a rifle from the weapons locker. He passed Edward a flare gun, just in case. Edward looked at the flare gun in disbelief. "Again?" "Let's hope not," Maya muttered, peeking through the blinds. The two figures didn't approach the cabin directly. Instead, they flanked out wide, one moving to the left, disappearing behind the supply shed, the other toward the rear tree line. "They're boxing us in," Albright said. "They want to flush us out." "We're not rabbits," Maya replied. "We hold." But Edward stepped forward. "I'll go. I'll draw them away. They want me, not you." Maya grabbed his arm. "No, that's what they expect you to do." He held her gaze. "If I walk out with hands up, I might buy time." Albright shook his head. You walk out there. You'll never be seen again. Maya made a decision. Fast. We fight smart. She moved to the back door, opened it slowly, and slipped out into the snow. She disappeared around the corner, the rifle slung over her shoulder like it was made for her. Edward turned to Albright. She's not a nurse, is she? Albright grunted. No, she's something else. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then shouts. Gunfire. Edward ducked low, heart pounding. He clutched the flare gun like it was a lifeline. Then the front door burst open. Maya entered. Face flushed, hair damp with snow. Behind her, one of the attackers lay in the snow alive. Bound, unconscious. Where's the other? Edward asked. Still out there, she said, but not for long. Albright moved to secure the front and call the dispatch again. Edward turned to Maya. You didn't have to come back. She looked at him, face unreadable. I didn't leave. The tension in the room slowly eased as the static from the radio gave way to a clear message. Ecosiete, rescue en route. Eta 40 minutes. Hold position. Edward let out a long breath. Maya dropped into the chair beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, You saved me again. She smiled faintly, looking down at her scraped hands. You're starting to owe me a lot. Outside, the snow began falling again. But this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a curtain falling on one act, and the beginning of something else. The rhythmic thump of the helicopter echoed through the valley before it appeared just a dark silhouette against a gray sky, slicing through falling snow with clinical precision. Maya stood beside Edward on the ridge outside the ranger station, her coat pulled tight, rifle slung low. Albright was a few feet away, holding a signal flag in one hand and his radio in the other. Edward's breath fogged as he looked at the chopper approaching. I didn't think we'd make it this far. No. Maya didn't take her eyes off the sky. It's not the end. The helicopter touched down in the clearing with a flurry of snow. 2 men in tactical gear jumped out, followed by a woman in a dark blue parka with a FEMA patch on her sleeve. She moved quickly toward them, her eyes scanning Edward first, then Maya. Edward Langston? She called over the blades. Edward nodded. I'm Agent Cara Delgado, Homeland Security. You're coming with us, now. Edward glanced at Maya. She gave a single nod, measured, but supportive. He turned back. And her? She's coming too. Delgado hesitated, then nodded curtly. Fine, let's move. They loaded quickly. Albright slapped Edward on the shoulder before he climbed aboard. Stay sharp, son. You too, Edward said, gripping the ranger's hand one last time. And thanks. Within minutes, the chopper lifted off, banking eastward toward the jagged mountain range. Edward and Maya sat side by side, the cabin loud with engine hum. Delgado sat opposite them, flipping through a tablet. You've been off the grid, she said, eyes on the screen, long enough to scare Washington. They thought maybe you defected. I didn't, Edward replied. I nearly died. Delgado looked at Maya. And you? I saved him, Maya answered. Delgado gave a thin smile. That's clear. For the next 30 minutes, nobody spoke. The landscape rolled beneath them, snow-draped forests giving way to river canyons and distant towns. It looked peaceful from the air. But Maya's fingers never left the grip of her rifle, and Edward's heart thumped harder the closer they got to civilization. They landed just outside Denver, at a secured FEMA field office built into a decommissioned airfield. The facility was stark, utilitarian. Maya stepped out of the chopper and scanned the perimeter high fences, guards, a perimeter that screamed emergency politics. Inside, they were split. Delgado took Edward down a long hallway flanked by one-way windows and buzz-lock doors. Maya was led in the opposite direction. Edward resisted. She stays with me. Delgado turned. You're in danger, Mr. Langston. We need to debrief you, and we need to know what you know. She'll be safe. I don't trust your definition of safe, he snapped. Delgado's jaw tightened. We're on your side. But right now, there are rules. Sit tight, and we'll talk. He hesitated. Maya gave him a calm look. I'll be fine. Reluctantly, Edward followed. They placed him in a secure interview room, glass walls, a white table, 2 chairs. He sat, hands clasped, as Delgado powered up a digital recorder. Tell me about Project Meridian, she said. Edward leaned back, eyes tired. I don't know the details. but I know someone inside the company was using it to move money through fake charities, encrypted accounts, likely to international buyers. Buyers? She asked. What kind of buyers? Blacklisted firms, defense contractors we shouldn't be dealing with, countries under embargo, but someone buried the trail deeper than I've ever seen. Names? Derek Vale, Trent Langston, maybe others on the board, but Vale came after me, found me in the mountains, said too much when he thought no one was listening. Delgado tapped her pen against her tablet. You realize how sensitive this is? Edward nodded. And dangerous. Dangerous enough to crash your plane? He met her gaze. I think they tried to erase me. Kill the audit trail. Kill the questions. Delgado looked at him for a long moment, then switched off the recorder. We've suspected Meridian was more than what Langston Aerospace disclosed, but we didn't have an internal voice. Mo, you have one now, Edward said. She nodded. And we'll need documentation. Testimony, names. You'll need to testify in front of a closed tribunal. Edward hesitated. And Maya? She's not under investigation. She's a witness. She's part of this now. Delgado estudied him. You trust her. She saved my life. More than once. Delgado leaned forward. Then you'll do what you need to keep her out of this. Because the men behind Meridian don't just go away. They erase. Meanwhile, Maya sat in a room with a softer edge still government-issued, but warmer somehow. An older black woman in a tailored blue suit sat across from her. Hands clasped. Name's Florence Bishop, she said. Internal oversight. They didn't separate you to interrogate you. They're protecting you. Maya raised an eyebrow. Is that what this is? Bishop smiled. You're the first person to put a body between Langston and a bullet. That makes you important. Some people won't like that. Zero. I don't care about being liked. Good, then you'll survive this. Maya folded her arms. What happens next? Bishop's smile faded. That depends. Edward gives them what they want, testifies, takes back control. Maybe it works. Maybe he cleans house. Maybe people go to prison. And if he doesn't, then you vanish. He vanishes. And Meridian becomes someone else's monster. Maya stared her down. That won't happen. I hope not. Bishop said. For both your sakes. No. By nightfall, Edward and Maya were reunited in a small apartment inside the facility. It wasn't much a bed, a couch, a kitchenette, but it was safe and warm and private. Edward collapsed onto the couch, exhaling deeply. You okay? Maya asked, sitting beside him. I don't know, he said. Everything's moving too fast. She reached for his hand. That's what fear does. Speeds up the clock. He looked at her. If this goes sideways, if I testify and they come after us. They already came after us. I don't want to lose you. Maya smiled softly, squeezing his hand. Then don't. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the building, the distant sound of helicopters. For the first time since the crash, Edward felt the weight of the real storm, the one waiting not in the snow, but in boardrooms and courts and headlines. But beside him was a woman who had carried him through fire, blizzards, and gunfire. And as the night deepened, he knew one truth more than any other. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to finish the story they'd started. The sterile hallway buzzed with fluorescent light as Edward adjusted his collar. His suit, borrowed from one of the facility's government-issue closets, fit slightly awkward, as if tailored for a version of himself he no longer was. He stared at his reflection in the glass pane beside the door, paler, leaner, older somehow. But there was a steadiness in his eyes now. A clarity. Maya stood beside him in a pressed gray blazer, her posture calm, but her jaw set. She hadn't said much all morning, but her presence was constant anchoring him. You ready? She asked. No, Edward replied, but I'm going in anyway. An aide in a dark blue suit opened the double doors and motioned them forward. Inside was a windowless conference room, walls lined with soundproof insulation. A long rectangular table dominated the space. At its head sat three figures: a federal judge, a high-ranking Homeland Security official, and a Department of Justice representative. All three wore expressions like stone impassive, controlled. Behind them, A small team of observers from different federal branches sat with notepads and earpieces. Everything was recorded. Every word mattered. "Mr. Langston," said the judge, "this proceeding is sealed. Testimony is protected under emergency whistleblower protocols. Your safety is our concern, but so is the integrity of what you're about to disclose." Edward nodded. "I understand. You've requested Miss Maya Williams be present? She's the reason I'm here." The DOJ representative leaned forward. "She will not be allowed to testify, but she may remain as an observer. Agreed?" Edward looked at Maya. She gave a short nod. "Agreed." The Homeland agent pressed a button on the table. A red light flicked on. "Begin." Edward inhaled deeply. "Project Meridian," he started, "was originally proposed as an aerospace defense coordination system. Civilian applications, commercial satellites, dual-use hardware that could assist both communications and surveillance. At least, that was the pitch." He paused, letting the words settle. "But over the past year, something changed. I began noticing movement transfers through our philanthropic arms that didn't match public filings. Millions routed through shell NGOs, then funneled offshore." The judge interjected. "What were these funds being used for?" "I believe for unauthorized surveillance contracts. Possibly political intelligence sold to foreign buyers' entities under embargo. The project became a laundering system for data access. Our encryption protocols, tied to satellite relay points, were being sold." "Meh. To whom?" the DOJ rep asked. Edward hesitated. "I don't know all the buyers. But I do know the pipeline passed through 2 board members. Derek Vale and my cousin, Trent Langston. Internal documents flagged them as signatories on off-books expenditures." "And when did you confront them?" "I didn't," Edward said quietly. "I was planning to bring the audit to the compliance officer. I sent an encrypted message marked Meridian Breach the night before my plane went down." "No." "And the crash?" Edward met their eyes. "I don't believe it was mechanical failure. I believe someone sabotaged the plane." Silence blanketed the room. The judge leaned forward. "You understand these are serious charges. You're accusing board members of treasonous activity." "I'm not accusing," Edward said. "I'm reporting. It's your job to accuse." The Homeland agent tapped his tablet. "We've begun recovering Langston Aerospace servers. The metadata confirms offshore movement, but we'll need access to your private keychain, your internal credentials." Edward nodded. "They're stored in my Colorado estate, encrypted inside a private vault. I can take you there." The DOJ official raised a brow. "You still have access?" "I built it myself. It's biometric. Only I can open it." The judge turned toward Maya. "Miss Williams, you're aware your role here is unofficial, but instrumental?" "Yes, Your Honor." "No. Are you willing to provide an affidavit about the events in the mountains, the pursuit, and the attempted harm?" Maya's voice was calm. "Yes. Under oath." The red light switched off. The judge looked to the Homeland officer. "Prepare a field team. We're flying to the estate within 48 hours, under federal protection." The room cleared slowly. People filed out, whispers already beginning. Maya and Edward remained in their seats until the room emptied. Finally, she turned to him. "That was brave." "No," Edward said, rubbing his hands together. "That was necessary." That night, they returned to the safe apartment. A hot meal had been waiting: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, the kind of food that stuck to the soul. Maya poured them both a glass of water and set one down in front of him. "You think they'll follow through?" "They have to now," Edward replied. "The testimony's been logged. If I go missing, it gets out." She nodded. "But you'll have to face your cousin." "I know. You ready to look Trent in the eye?" Edward stared into the glass. "I don't think I've ever really seen him before. Not the way I do now." Maya sat across from him, removing her boots. "When this is over," she asked softly, "what do you want?" Edward didn't answer at first. Then, looking at her, voice steady, "Peace. A life where no one's pulling strings behind my back, and maybe if I'm lucky someone to share it with." She smiled, tired but real. "One step at a time." The next morning came early. Federal agents moved swiftly 2 armored SUVs, a black helicopter on standby. Maya and Edward were escorted under high security. As they pulled out of the facility, Edward caught a glimpse of Denver's skyline in the distance. It looked different now. More real. Less distant. They drove west into the Colorado foothills, winding toward the estate that Edward hadn't seen since the crash. As they approached the iron gates of Langston Manor, memories flooded back Claire's laughter in the garden, summer dinners on the patio, business calls taken beneath oak trees. The gate opened. The SUVs moved up the long driveway, passing the marble fountain and the cold, elegant face of a house built to impress strangers. Inside, everything was untouched. Edward walked ahead of the agents, past the grand staircase, through the library, into a concealed hallway behind a false bookshelf. He reached the vault, a steel door with a biometric scanner. He placed his hand against the reader. Beep. Click. The door slid open. Inside, beneath shelves of ledgers and encrypted drives, was a single black tablet. He powered it on. The interface blinked to life, asking for a voice phrase. Edward spoke quietly. Meridian, initiate. The tablet decrypted. He turned to the agents. It's all here, he said. Proof. Every shell company, every contract, every recipient. Die. One of the agents nodded, taking the device. This is enough to bring charges. Edward stepped back, but before he could exhale, the power in the estate flickered. The lights dimmed. Then the alarms began to wail. Maya spun toward the hallway. They're here. Edward grabbed her hand, and together, they ran toward the storm now waiting inside his own house. The sirens wailed through Langston Manor like a scream from the past. Red emergency lights began to strobe along the crown molding, casting a ghastly glow across polished marble floors and ancestral oil paintings. The federal agents in the hallway reached for their weapons instinctively. Edward, pulse pounding, yanked Maya behind a stone column near the vault entrance. What the hell is this? He yelled over the alarm. Maya peered toward the corridor. This is what an inside job looks like. One of the agents, a woman named Ruiz, barked into her comms. Unit Echo, status update. We've got breach signals, confirm perimeter security. The static that came back made Maya's stomach drop. They're jamming communications, she said. Ruiz turned to Edward. Is this your system? Edward shook his head. No, this isn't Langston Aerospace Protocol. Someone's overriding the grid. They're already inside. Another agent, tall and wiry, pulled the encrypted tablet close to his chest. We have to exfil immediately. If they get this data, we don't run, Maya interrupted. Not yet. Edward met her gaze. We're not equipped for a shootout. We don't need to fight them head on, Maya replied. We need to outsmart them. From upstairs, a loud crack wood splintering, glass shattering, then the dull thud of boots descending the staircase. Edward motioned to the back hall. There's a greenhouse corridor, service tunnels beneath. We can loop behind them, get to the garage. Ruiz nodded. Move. I'll cover the rear. They moved in a tight column through the dimly lit hallway, passing velvet drapes and empty display cases. Maya clutched her sidearm tight, eyes sweeping corners. She could feel the cold sweat between her shoulder blades. Halfway down the corridor, Edward suddenly froze. He turned toward a portrait on the wall, his grandfather, Harold Langston, depicted with one hand resting on a globe. Behind the frame, he pressed a wooden panel. A soft click revealed a narrow, hidden passage. Shortcut, he whispered. They entered one by one, ducking beneath low rafters, feet echoing against stone steps. The tunnel snaked beneath the estate, dimly lit by battery lanterns placed decades earlier. When they finally emerged into the garage, they found two black SUVs parked and waiting, but they weren't alone. 3 armed men, tactical gear and balaclavas, stood at the vehicle bay. One held a silencer-tipped weapon pointed directly at them. Drop it, he said flatly. Ruiz raised her hands, but didn't drop her weapon. You're trespassing on federal property, she said. The man didn't blink. So are you. Behind them, the vault team clustered in tight. Maya stepped forward, slowly, lowering her gun. Let me talk to them, she murmured to Edward. He whispered back, Maya, but she had already taken a slow step forward, eyes locked on the man with the gun. You don't have to do this, she said calmly. You're soldiers, right? Contractors, maybe. You signed up for money, not this. What they're doing, what Meridian is doing, isn't patriotism. It's treason. The gunman's grip didn't waver. but something in his stance faltered. You really want to shoot a nurse and a whistleblower for a paycheck? He hesitated. Then, pop, a gunshot exploded behind them, not from the attackers, from the stairwell. The second assailant dropped, a red bloom on his chest. Ruiz shouted, "Down." Maya hit the floor, dragging Edward with her as bullets erupted. Chaos. The garage lit with muzzle flashes. Federal agents returned fire. Another attacker tried to run, but was gunned down by Ruiz's partner near the door. Within seconds, it was over. The silence afterward was louder than the gunfire. Maya pushed up slowly, checking Edward for wounds. "You okay?" He nodded, shaken, but alive. Ruiz stepped forward, rifle still raised. They were trained, not local muscle. Edward looked toward the one attacker who still groaned on the floor, clutching his side. "Get his mask off," he said. The man struggled, but didn't resist as they pulled it away. It was a familiar face. Carl Danton, former Langston Aerospace security director. Edward's jaw clenched. "He was on my payroll." Ruiz looked between them. "This goes deep." Edward turned to Maya. "Trent." She nodded grimly. "He didn't just want the data gone. He wanted you gone. Personally." Edward took a breath and looked around the garage. "Then let's give him what he's afraid of." An hour later, the remaining agents had secured the estate. The encrypted tablet was duplicated and uploaded to a secure federal server. Danton had been restrained, sedated, and airlifted for questioning. Maya and Edward stood on the terrace overlooking the snow-covered garden, the same garden where he once toasted company mergers and drank champagne with senators. Now it looked like a battlefield. "He knows we have the proof now," Maya said. "He'll retaliate. He'll try," Edward replied. "But we don't just have documents anymore. We have a survivor. And a witness. And a voice," she added. He looked at her, a mix of exhaustion and admiration in his eyes. "I don't know where this ends," he admitted. "I just know it has to." Ugh. Maya turned toward the descending sun, golden light cutting through gray clouds. "It ends when people stop covering for monsters." He nodded. Then she said quietly, "Or when someone finally exposes them." Behind them, the judge's escort team returned, ready to begin the legal process. Edward looked at Maya again. "You said you'd stay with me," he said softly. "And I will," she replied. Then she gave him a faint, tired smile. "But next time, we're escaping to Hawaii, not a blizzard." He laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. The storm had reached the house, but they were still standing, and the truth had finally found the light. The courtroom was colder than Edward expected. Not in temperature, though. The marble floors and tall, echoing ceilings lent a certain chill, but in atmosphere. This wasn't a public trial. This was a sealed tribunal, attended only by federal officials, attorneys, and 2 reporters from the Washington Sentinel with strict clearance and non-disclosure agreements. Cameras weren't allowed. Every word spoken here would be typed, redacted, and then buried until someone decided it was safe to bring to light. Edward sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a black suit, not too expensive, not too modest, just enough to remind everyone that he was once powerful and still dangerous in the right ways. Maya sat behind him, not as an official witness but as moral ballast. She was the only one he trusted to look at if the world started spinning. Across the room, Trent Langston entered, flanked by 2 lawyers and a grin that had once gotten him through every college disciplinary hearing and SEC audit. Edward didn't look away. Trent took his seat at the defense table, glanced around the room, then gave Edward a slow, sarcastic wink. The presiding judge, a stern woman with sharp cheekbones and a military posture, entered moments later. Everyone stood. Everyone Saturday. The hearing began. Mr. Langston, the DOJ attorney, began, standing and addressing the room. "Can you state your position at Langston Aerospace for the record?" Trent leaned forward slightly, voice smooth. "Acting chairman and interim CEO, following my cousin's unfortunate disappearance." Edward flinched. "And how long have you held that position?" 18 months. "And during that time, were you aware of a project titled Meridian?" Trent tilted his head like he was playing along with a joke. Vaguely. It was one of many defense-oriented proposals that crossed the board's table. Nothing concrete. "Bees. Were you aware of funds routed through off-book accounts to shell organizations tied to blacklisted defense contractors? Absolutely not. Were you aware that your cousin, Edward Langston, had begun compiling internal audits that exposed these transactions? Trent's smile wavered. I was told he was under a great deal of stress before his flight. Perhaps. Unstable. Maya, watching from the back, gripped her chair. The attorney paused. Unstable enough to fake a crash and vanish for months? Trent shrugged. You'd have to ask him. Edward stood. I'd be happy to answer that, he said clearly. The judge gestured for him to take the stand. As Edward walked past Trent, he noticed the subtle twitch at the corner of his cousin's jaw. The mask was slipping. He took the oath. Saturday. The DOJ attorney paced slowly. Mr. Langston, tell us in your own words, how did you survive the crash? Edward recounted it plainly. The storm, the mountains, the cold that clawed into his bones. Then Maya, her voice, her fire, her spine, the cabin, the rescue, the pursuit. And when did you realize someone wanted you dead? Edward looked across the room, not at Trent but at the judge. When the crash wasn't investigated. When my family declared me dead in 2 weeks. When Meridian continued without oversight. When people started showing up in the woods with rifles. The judge leaned forward. Do you believe your cousin was involved? Edward nodded once. I know he was. Because he signed the authorizations. Because his voice is in the audio recording Maya recovered from the cabin. A murmur rippled through the observers. The judge turned to the bailiff. Enter the audio file into sealed evidence. Edward's hands tightened in his lap. He continued. Trent didn't just sell access to defense tech. He laundered influence. He let hostile actors into our systems. He cashed in our national security for private gain. Trent's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is speculation. The judge silenced him with a raised hand. This tribunal will review all submitted files. Mr. Langston may proceed. Edward stared directly at Trent. You didn't just betray your country. You betrayed our name. You stood in our grandfather's house and sold the foundation he built. Trent laughed, soft but venomous. Our grandfather built bombs, Edward. You just chose to feel guilty about it. Silence again. Heavy, dense. Then Edward said quietly, maybe. But I never sold them to the highest bidder without caring where they'd land. After the hearing recessed, Edward and Maya stepped out into the side corridor. He leaned against the wall, exhausted. You did well, Maya said gently. I don't know if it's enough. She shrugged. That's not your part. You told the truth. Now it's on them. He looked at her. And after this? She gave a quiet laugh. I thought you were supposed to be the rich genius. You mean you don't have a plan? He smiled weakly. I used to think life was about strategy, forecasts, control. But now? He looked at her. Now I think it's about knowing who you'd still run into a fire for. She didn't say anything, but her hand found his. Back in the courtroom, Trent's lawyers filed a motion to strike Edward's testimony, claiming emotional bias and trauma. It was denied. The evidence package, ledgers, transfers, metadata trails, the decrypted tablet was submitted for forensic review. Closing arguments would follow in 48 hours. The Department of Justice began preparing federal indictments. Outside the courthouse, protesters had gathered. The media buzzed like hornets. Whispers of betrayal at the highest levels of corporate America echoed across headlines. Stocks fluctuated. Langston Aerospace's board was in chaos. Inside their hotel room that night, Maya watched Edward stand by the window, looking down at the swirl of city lights. You okay? She asked. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, I should have seen it sooner. You see it now. That's what matters. He turned to her. I lost everything. She walked to him, took his hand. Not everything. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of all the things they didn't have to say. Not yet. The next morning brought headlines that Edward never thought he'd see with his name attached. Langston bloodline on trial for treason. Edward Langston speaks. Family betrayal at the heart of national security breach. From fortune to fallout, the billionaire who survived a crash and exposed a conspiracy. Maya slid the newspaper across the table while Edward stirred his coffee with a dazed expression. The sunlight through the hotel window painted gold across the headline, as if mocking him. He stared at it, eyes hollow. Feels like reading an obituary. Mine. Maya leaned on the table, her voice soft but clear. You survived your own death once. You can survive your name being dragged. He looked up at her. But that name built a legacy. A company. 1,000 jobs. Now it's stained. She pushed the newspaper aside gently. Legacies aren't made from glass. If they shatter this easily, they were never solid to begin with. He gave a small, tired laugh. That sounds like something my grandfather would have hated to hear. Then it's probably true, she said. A knock came at the door before he could reply. Edward stood, nerves tightening. He opened it to find a government courier, a young man in a gray windbreaker, with a federal seal. Mr. Langston, you've been summoned to a private arbitration at Langston Estate, per agreement with DOJ and the company board. Edward's brow furrowed. The estate? Again? Yes, sir. This time, they want a formal handover. The company is being restructured under new leadership. They want you to be present as the primary whistleblower. He hesitated, then nodded. We'll be there. As the door closed, Maya crossed her arms. That's not a peace offering. That's bait. I know, Edward said, but this time we don't go alone. That afternoon, 3 black SUVs wound through the snowy foothills again. But unlike before, they weren't hiding. This time, they came with an escort, 2 federal agents, 2 lawyers, and Maya with a holstered sidearm she wasn't pretending not to have. Langston Estate loomed like a monument to a dream turned sour. The fountain out front was frozen over, its marble angels coated in ice. The main doors stood open as if the house itself had been waiting. Inside, they were greeted not by Trent Langston, but by Linda Moreau, the company's interim board chair. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, wearing a winter blazer that likely cost more than most used cars. She greeted Edward with the cautious respect usually reserved for survivors of political coups. Mr. Langston, she said, extending her hand, thank you for coming, and for doing what needed to be done. Edward shook her hand, his voice even. I assume you've reviewed the files. She nodded. Every line. The board is in shock, but not surprised. It's a strange relief when your instincts are finally proven right. He raised an eyebrow. You suspected? She didn't answer directly. Let's just say, too many questions went unanswered. Too many back doors got installed in places we didn't approve. And too many meetings were held after hours. Maya studied her. Why now? Why not 6 months ago? Linda met her gaze without flinching. Because 6 months ago, we didn't have a survivor. Now we do. She led them to the main study, where a large table had been arranged with documents, flash drives, and coffee carafes. 2 board members joined, visibly uncomfortable. No Trent. His chair remained conspicuously empty. The Department of Justice will handle criminal charges, Linda said. But internally, we have to move forward. We're formally offering you a position non-operational, of course as an ethics advisor and auditor emeritus. You'd oversee the post-meridian cleanup. Edward frowned. You want me back in the company? She nodded. Not as a figurehead, as a compass. For once, we'd rather not lie to ourselves. He looked around at the estate study, at the walls covered in Langston family memorabilia. His father's achievements, his grandfather's military citations, and beneath it all, the weight of a name that meant power, silence, and control. I don't know if I'm the right person for that job, he admitted. Maya stepped beside him. But you're the only one who knows what not to repeat. Linda watched the exchange, then added, we also recovered a letter from your grandfather. It was never mailed. It was written 3 months before he passed. She handed Edward a weathered envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. Edward, if you ever find this, it means you chose the harder path. That means you've earned my respect. Remember, a name is just a door. It only matters where it leads. Don't protect the house. Protect the people who enter it. H.L. Edward stared at the letter for a long moment, then folded it and placed it in his jacket. I'll accept the position, he said quietly. But I want full transparency, no NDAs. and Maya stays on as a civilian oversight liaison. Linda blinked. She's not an employee. She's the reason I'm here. Maya smiled faintly. And I have opinions. Linda gave a tight nod. Then it's done. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Edward and Maya stood in the estate's greenhouse, now cleared of debris. Warmth returned to the room, flowers beginning to bloom again in heat lamps. Edward ran his fingers along a small white rosebud. My grandfather planted this one, he said softly. Said it only bloomed under pressure. Maya tilted her head, kind of like you. He turned to her, eyes gentler than they'd been in days. I've spent years trying to control everything. Stock prices, board votes, perception. But I never planned for a storm. She stepped closer. Sometimes storms clear the path. He took her hand. This house, this company, it's not going to heal overnight, but I think maybe I can start to make something new. Not alone, she said. No, he whispered. Not anymore. Outside, the estate lights glowed faintly against the snow, but inside, in that quiet space between fire and frost, something had shifted. The air had returned, not to reclaim power, but to rebuild what should have never been broken. It had been 3 weeks since the tribunal, and still, Edward hadn't had a full night's sleep. Every morning, the Langston Aerospace headquarters greeted him with a thick folder of internal memos, audit trails, and nervous emails from executives who now called him Sir, like they were addressing a ghost. He wasn't the CEO. He wasn't technically anything by title, but his presence in the building was enough to change the temperature of every boardroom he entered. Maya had taken an office just down the hall, small, sunlit, filled with handwritten notes, and a corkboard covered in red thread that made interns nervous. Her role, unofficially titled Ethics Liaison, had already uncovered 2 minor conspiracies, 3 illegal contractor arrangements, and a quietly buried harassment case. Edward watched her work from his glass-walled office more than he liked to admit. Today, though, wasn't about investigations. Today was about reckoning. He stood before a crowd of Langston employees, engineers, analysts, veterans of the old guard, and bright-eyed hires who had started during the company's darker phase. The auditorium buzzed with a tension he knew intimately. It was the sound of people waiting to see if they still believed in something. A company-wide meeting hadn't happened in years. Not like this. Edward stepped up to the podium and took a breath. My name is Edward Langston, and I'm not your CEO. Silence, but I am responsible. For what this company became, for what it allowed, and for what it tried to hide. The silence deepened, heavy and electric. For decades, Langston Aerospace built its reputation on patriotism, innovation, and trust. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that those values aren't trademarks. They're promises. He paused. Not a single cough or rustle broke the air. Some of you know what I survived. Some of you know what I exposed. But this isn't about me. It's about us. Every engineer who wrote a line of code thinking it was helping soldiers, not spies. Every accountant who signed off on budget lines that got rerouted without explanation. Every employee who asked questions and got silence. His voice tightened. We were used. All of us. And that ends today. The crowd began to stir, postures straightening, eyes sharpening. I'm not here to clean house with fire. I'm here to rebuild with you. With oversight, with transparency, and with a commitment that every decision, every contract, every bite of data reflects the values we pretend to believe. A beat. And if that means losing shareholders who don't like the truth, so be it. Applause broke out slowly, then grew. Not thunderous, not triumphant, but real. Maya stood in the back of the auditorium, arms folded, nodding once. He was doing it. Not saving the company, saving its soul. Later that evening, the offices dimmed as people filed out. Edward returned to his corner space, where the city lights flickered across the skyline. He loosened his tie, sat heavily in the leather chair that used to belong to his father, and stared at the tablet in his lap. It contained the final list. Names. Those complicit in Meridian. Those who signed off on backdoor access. Some had already resigned. Others were under sealed investigation. But 2 names still sat untouched. Trent Langston, Derek Vale. The court had delayed the final indictments pending further evidence. Federal agents warned Edward that pressing too fast could backfire. "We want them airtight," one said. "No loopholes." But every day they walked free, Edward felt the walls of justice bend a little more. A knock broke his thoughts. Maya entered, still in her work clothes, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. "I figured you'd still be here," she said. "You missed dinner." "I wasn't hungry." She walked over, saw the tablet. "They're still waiting?" He nodded. "The DOJ wants to take Vail down on financial crimes, but they're debating whether to pursue treason." "And Trent?" Edward leaned back, weary. "He's playing innocent, claiming he was manipulated, that he signed things without context, which is exactly what he counted on others doing," Maya said bitterly. He looked at her. "I want to destroy him." Maya didn't flinch. "But I also don't want to become him." She sat beside him. "That's the price of peace," she said softly. "You could burn everything down. You'd be justified. But what's left after the fire?" He turned toward her. "What would you do?" Maya took a long breath. "I'd give them the evidence. Every line. Every code. Let the system carry it. But if it fails, if it stumbles, then I'd remind them, in public, of what it cost you. What it cost all of us." Edward nodded slowly. "Truth first, fire later." She smiled faintly. "Exactly. They sat in silence, watching the lights outside. Somewhere below, the world spun, profits rose, politics raged. But in this quiet office, two people sat on the knife's edge between power and purpose. Edward reached over, took her hand. "This wasn't what I expected," he said. "Not the crash, not the fight, not you." Maya tilted her head. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He chuckled. "The best things never go as planned." A pause. Then, "I don't want to lose you after this is over." "You won't," she said. "Promise." She leaned in, kissed his temple. "I didn't survive a snowstorm, a crash, and an assassination just to walk away." Outside, the city blinked. Inside, two lives once strangers, now stitched together by blood, bullets, and belief sat, facing a future neither could define. But for the first time since the fall, there was no fear in the waiting. The chopper blades sliced through the cold morning air as they crested over the Colorado Ridge. A low hum vibrated through the cabin, masking the unease that sat heavy between Edward and the three federal agents accompanying him. In the seat across from him, Maya clutched the edge of her seat tightly, her eyes locked on the approaching horizon. Below them, nestled against the snowy peaks, was the Langston family hunting lodge, remote, fortified, and completely off-grid. A perfect place for secrets, or for disappearing. And according to the last intercepted satellite ping from a burner phone registered to Derek Vail, it was where Trent Langston had gone to ground. "We sure he's here?" Edward asked, raising his voice over the rotor noise. Agent Ruiz, seated beside the pilot, turned. Thermal imaging picked up movement last night. One adult male. One security detail. Cabins powered. No sign of snowmobiles leaving since yesterday. Edward nodded, jaw clenched. "Then this ends today." Maya reached across the narrow aisle and squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens." "I know," he said, gripping hers in return. The helicopter began its descent. The landing was rough gusts of wind pushing against the ridge. Snow swirled like ash as the team disembarked. Rifles raised. Footsteps muffled by fresh powder. The lodge loomed ahead, its wooden beams covered in ice, but smoke curled from the chimney like a quiet taunt. Ruiz gave silent hand signals, flank left, breach ready. Edward and Maya stayed low behind the lead agent. They approached the front porch. The wooden steps creaked under Ruiz's boots as she stepped forward and knocked twice. No answer. Then a voice from inside, casual, calm. "Edward." "I knew you'd come." It was Trent. Edward's pulse spiked. "Unarmed," Trent called. "Come in. Let's talk like family." Ruiz nodded. The door creaked open slowly, and Edward stepped in first. The cabin interior was warm, lit by a roaring fire and low lanterns. The scent of burning pine and aged whiskey lingered in the air. Trent sat in a leather armchair near the hearth, a tumbler of scotch in one hand, wearing a dark sweater and slacks, as if this were just another holiday visit. "You look like hell," he said with a smirk. Edward didn't sit. You're under federal investigation for espionage and conspiracy. You shouldn't be smiling. Trent swirled his drink. You think they'll convict me? Please. I have friends in places you can't even pronounce. You think this is over? This is chess, not checkers. Maya entered behind Edward, eyes scanning the room. No visible weapons, no guards. You're alone, she observed. Trent raised his glass in salute. I don't need bodyguards. I have leverage. He pointed to the fireplace, where a laptop rested, open and active. Encrypted dead man's switch. I push a key, and every file you think you recovered gets mirrored to darknet markets. Foreign buyers, the press, everyone gets a piece. Edward stepped closer. So what do you want? Trent leaned back. I want immunity. Public exoneration. You step down from whatever crusade you're on. Let the company return to actual leadership. And in return, I don't torch your precious redemption arc. Edward stared at him, expression unreadable. Then he turned to Ruiz. Step out for a minute. May. Ruiz frowned. We're not. Do it, he said firmly. Please. Reluctantly, Ruiz motioned for her agents to step out. Maya stayed. Trent raised an eyebrow. Brave. Edward walked to the fireplace, stared into the flames. You always liked control, Trent. Even when we were kids, you were the one who rewired the house locks, the one who convinced the gardener to cover for us when we crashed the golf cart. Trent laughed softly. And you were always the good one, the idealist, the Langston with a conscience. Edward turned to face him. I'm not that man anymore. Trent's grin faltered slightly. Edward reached into his coat, pulled out a small encrypted drive, and tossed it onto the table. That's a mirror of the files, but it also has something extra. A video, your voice, authorizing foreign wire transfers to shell companies in Belarus and Iran. It was buried in a backup Maya recovered from the cabin. Trent blinked. Edward stepped closer. You think you're the only one with leverage? If I walk out of here without you, that video goes live. Every news channel, every security agency. No immunity, no exile, just a cell. Trent's face tightened. You're bluffing. Maya stepped forward. I watched it twice, she said, even slowed it down. You called the buyer Red Wolf, Trent. You used the same name you used to call your stupid dog in college. Silence. Edward lowered his voice. We don't want to fight, but you don't get to win. Not this time. Trent stared at the fire. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and closed the laptop. I want a jet, he said. Private, unregistered. I vanish, you leak nothing. Maya shook her head. You don't get to disappear, not after what you did. But Edward held up a hand. He's not going anywhere. Ruiz stepped back in, weapon raised. Are we done here? Edward looked at Trent, who now looked very small in his chair. Yes, he said. We are. No. Hours later, back in Denver, Edward stood on the courthouse steps as news broke of Trent Langston's arrest. The headlines came fast. The board released an emergency statement. Stock froze, but within it all, a strange calm settled over him. Maya joined him, breath steaming in the cold. It's done, she said. He nodded. Mostly. They watched the crowd form reporters, citizens, former employees holding signs. One read, Truth wins. Finally. Another, Langston Aerospace, belongs to the people now. Edward turned to Maya. You were the one who saved me, you know. She smiled. You returned the favor. He took her hand. Come on, he said. Let's go home. Where's that? He smiled. Wherever you are. As they walked down the steps, side by side, the first light of dawn crept across the mountains. And for the first time since the crash, Edward Langston walked not as a billionaire, but as a man who chose truth over blood. 6 months later, the Langston name no longer meant what it once did. Not scandal, not stock tickers, not power whispered in marble hallways. In some places, it meant hope. In others, it meant redemption. And for a few, especially those who'd profited in the shadows, it still meant threat. But Edward no longer carried it like a crown or a curse. It was simply his name, and he had decided what it would mean going forward. The Colorado summer had finally thawed the last of the snow, and the hills around the Langston estate were green again. Edward stood on the back veranda, watching the workers install new solar panels across the greenhouse roof. The structure that once sheltered secrets now grew herbs for the local food bank and orchids for trauma patients at the VA hospital downtown. "You know," Maya's voice called from behind, "you're doing a terrible job pretending you're not watching them work." Edward smiled. "I thought I was being subtle." She stepped beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He took one with quiet gratitude. "You sure you want to keep the estate open to the public?" she asked. "There's still people who think you're trying to rebrand your image." He took a sip, then shrugged. "Maybe I am, but the kids from the veterans program love it here, and the greenhouse volunteers say this place gives them something to wake up for." Maya studied him. "And you?" He looked out at the landscape, once a kingdom of secrets, now blooming with hands that had nothing to hide. "I wake up for this." They stood in silence, the warm breeze lifting the edge of her scarf. A few birds settled on the wrought iron fence near the rose beds, now bursting in soft pink and white. Down the hill, a small group of visitors exited a tour van, mostly older couples, some veterans, a few retirees, and a teacher with 2 teenage students. A sign near the gravel path read, "Langston Legacy Center, entry free, truth included." Inside the main house, a new exhibit had opened, From Silence to Sound, the Whistleblower Files. Original schematics from Project Meridian. Redacted memos. A replica of the encrypted tablet that started it all. At the end of the hallway, a video played on loop, a short documentary about how a nurse found a stranger in the snow, saved his life, and stood beside him as he took down a machine much larger than himself. The voiceover? "Mayas, I never planned to be part of someone else's legacy," she said in the opening lines. "But sometimes justice doesn't ask for permission. It just knocks and you either answer, or you pretend you didn't hear it." Visitors sat quietly as the film played. A few wiped away tears. Others stood a little taller when it ended. In the final frame, truth is not the opposite of power. It is its foundation. That afternoon, Edward held his first open forum with Langston Aerospace staff at the downtown tech hub. No podium, no security stage, just folding chairs and a whiteboard. He spoke of audits, of oversight, of regret, of the months spent rebuilding trust, not just inside the company but outside it, with suppliers, communities, even rivals. "Are we perfect yet?" he said, facing the employees. "Absolutely not. But we're building in daylight now. And I'll take slow truth over fast lies any day of the week." A younger engineer raised his hand. "What about you? Are you ever coming back in an official role?" Edward shook his head. "I've done my time in glass towers. I'll stay involved. But this company needs to move beyond me. That's the point." "No." Afterward, several employees approached him quietly, one handing him a letter, another just asking for a handshake. A few just said, "Thank you." That night, back at the estate, Edward stood outside the small guest cabin now restored and converted into a writing space. Maya had taken to journaling there, sometimes poetry, sometimes sharp essays about justice and policy, sometimes just thoughts that couldn't fit into conversation. He knocked gently on the door. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside, saw the room warm and familiar. On the desk, photos of them with the volunteers, sketches of the rose garden, a list titled, "Things We Save," with only 2 items written, "People, the truth." "You're writing again," he said. She nodded. "Helps me make sense of everything. Helps me remember." He stepped closer. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about what comes next." She met his eyes. "For you? Or for us?" "Both," he said. "Maybe we don't need a company or a mansion to keep doing good. Maybe we just need a plan, a map, and each other." Her eyes softened. "You want to disappear again? For good this time?" "No, I want to appear. Somewhere that needs us. Together." "Zero," she smiled. "I've got a cousin running a clinic in Detroit. They're rebuilding from the inside out." He chuckled. "I guess I can trade suits for work boots." She walked toward him, rested her forehead against his. "I didn't fall in love with a billionaire," she whispered.